Welcome to the Driving Change Podcast on the Evergreen Podcast Network, where we live at the intersection of neuroscience and storytelling. If you love great stories and you love understanding the mindset it takes to be a world-class change agent, then join us as our fascinating guests from all walks of life unpack their unique journeys of perseverance and passion, of expertise and experience, and be inspired to use your own story to drive change. Well, welcome back to the Driving Change Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Jeff Bloomfield. Have you ever met a person just randomly when you've been out and about and you thought, well, that's a very interesting person? I bet there's a lot more layers underneath that initial story than what I got to understand. I sure would like to learn more about that person's story. Today's guest is one of those people. I happened to stumble across Gary Scott Thomas, if you will, when I was at a speaking event in California, and we just so happened to end up sitting down having lunch together. And I started to understand this is a pretty fascinating, I won't say young man, but he's still a young man. He's still a young man by all intents and purposes. And Gary Scott Thomas is someone who's been an award-winning DJ, one of the top radio stations in the country at one point. He hosts his own podcast show now, which is killing it out in California. What I loved about his career, he got into radio at an early age at 13, found his love, his passion, and took that passion and turned it into something that he could actually have a career around. And he's been from interviewing every singer you could possibly imagine. He did pop radio, country radio. He's interviewed artists, authors, musicians, comedians. I mean, he's someone who just understands the complexity of humanity through his artistry of curiosity and his ability to then take all that information and storytell it and put it out into the world in a useful way. So I can't wait to dive into Gary Scott Thomas's background, his bio, his backstory, and let you all listen to a little bit of the brilliance that is one Gary Scott Thomas. Welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
I am thrilled to be here, and I've been stumbled over before. I went to college. No, I am so excited about being here because I told you I'm a fan of your podcast. My only problem with you, Jeff Bloomfield, is you don't do it enough. I need it every day. I can't tell you some of the episodes that have just rocked me to the core that you've done, that I've just become such a fan of.
Well, you're too kind. You're too kind. So I'm hoping I'm going to learn from you today because you're the podcast whisperer on here, right? It's you and Joe Rogan. So let's go. Let's get.
Yeah, there's only a 9-figure difference, but yeah, it's me and Joe Rogan.
Let's go. So somebody stumbled over you, they stumbled onto him. So it's just a difference of degrees.
I have had him on my show a couple of times, not when he became Joe Rogan, back when he was just a comedian and also the host of Fear Factor.
Yeah.
Right. So he'd been on my show a number of times. And if I had only known.
If you'd have only known. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just like this one little girl we had we had her at this little dive bar show we had. And we had her out and her mother was with her because she was underage and she got up and sang and her name was Taylor Swift and she came out twice.
Wow.
So it's like, but you don't know.
No.
You have no idea. I wish I could tell you who's going to be big. I have this thing. Here's a story. So I'm sitting in the office one day and sitting in there with us is Kenny Chesney. Now at the time, Kenny Chesney, nobody knew who Kenny Chesney was. And he sat back there in the office and he goes, I'm just trying to figure out how to be a big star. And I said, Kenny, if I knew that secret, I'd be talking to somebody a lot bigger than you. At the time, because he was just a guy. He was this short little guy and he was playing a lot of slow songs. He hadn't figured out his beat motif yet.
Right. Well, and that's a very interesting point you make right out of the outset of the show is that if you live life in a way that's curious about other people and you're fascinated because everybody's got a story and you treat them with kindness and respect and understanding and you try to get to know their story. It's not that you're doing it for self-serving gain. It's just that you just never know when those stories and those those paths cross back again and how God might use that connection that you met somebody 10 years ago to cross your path again because you're both on the same track again. So before we get into anything further, let's dive back. Let's go backwards. Now tell us the Gary Scott Thomas, Flo, Alabama story, like where Gary comes from, who had the biggest influence on your early life, and really what turned some of those early beliefs and values that turned you into the guy you are today?
I grew up in South Alabama, a little town called Florella. It was literally on the Florida-Alabama line. That's how it got its name, Florella. And I went to high school in Alabama, and my brother went to high school in Florida because we lived on the state line. And we were desperately poor. I had my mother made $200 a month. And even back then, that was no money. And grew up, had cardboard walls. And my father was alcoholic and a drug addict. So when you say, but he had a lot of personality, a lot of, everybody loved him. The problem is everybody who didn't know him loved him. Those of us who knew him, we had our reservations. But I learned early on, we were poor, but I didn't think anything of it. Right? It's what it was. It was how you existed. And the free lunches were in our school, they would call you up to get your free lunch card. So you had to walk to the front of the class so everybody would know you were on the free lunch program. But I did that. I was an oops baby. My oldest sister is almost 18 years older than me. Her oldest son is 2 years younger than me, and he has 2 grandchildren the same age as my children.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So those are my great nephews, if you're doing the math. Right? So I almost kind of grew up as an only child because my older brother was 4 years older than me. And, 8-year-olds have no interest for a 4-year-old, and a 12-year-old has no interest for an 8-year-old. And we became friends after I got out of school. After I got out of high school, then I became interesting to him. And he was a great guy. Don't get me wrong. I've been blessed with the greatest family. But I worked. My first job was hooking up cows at a milking machine. You and I have that in common. As far as doing that, working on farms, and it taught me real quick that I never want to work that hard in my entire life. And I have nothing but respect for farmers. But they opened up a radio station in my little small town. It was located in a house trailer. And I applied for the job and got it. Little did I know, I was the only person who applied.
Yeah, well, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, WKWL, I made $1 an hour. I worked 3 hours a week, $12 a month take home. And I loved it because I used to get up early in the morning and I had this little AM radio, it looked like a ball. And I would tune in WLS in Chicago, a guy named Larry Lubjack, super jock. And I loved him because at the time, everybody in radio that I heard was, hey, it's a great day and it's going to be a wonderful day and here we go and yay and yay. And he was the first guy I ever heard come on the air and go, it's 5:07 and I'm so tired I can't feel my knees. Right? And he just had that, but he was funny, but he was real. Yeah. And I fell in love with that. And I worked throughout high school. And when I was going to college, because I decided to go to college, because let's be clear, in my family, and I tell my children this, there was no value placed on education. My parents didn't care if I flunked out or what, because they didn't. They grew up in World War II. Their parents grew up in World War I. You were expected to just get out, get a job at the factory, have your 6 kids, die when you're 56, and there you go. Right. That's life. And I just decided early on, there's got to be something to this education thing. So I made the impetus to learn something. And I went to college, and because I'd scored really well in the ACT in English, I decided to major in English literature. Why? Because I didn't even consider radio. Because no one I knew liked their job. I didn't know one person who would get up and go, man, I'm loving what I'm doing today. So I subconsciously thought, you can't do anything fun for a living. That's just not an option. So I just figured I'd get out and teach. I had no interest in teaching, but I just figured, well, it's something. And my goal when I was in college that I thought one day, if I could make $1,000 a month, I would be the richest person from anyone in my family that I knew.
High cotton, right? You're in high cotton.
I couldn't imagine. There was no one in my family I knew was making $1,000 a month. And I just figured if I could hit that magic number, I'd probably marry an actress and have a jet. Right. And I was majoring in college, and I'd worked all throughout. I'd had jobs. People kept offering me jobs, and I would do them because I loved it. And I was getting ready. I was about 3 months from getting out of school. And a guy called me who I'd worked with at the service station and said, "Hey, we've got this opening in Louisiana from 10 p.m. 2 a.m. He goes, "Why don't you come do it?" And I'm like, "I don't know, Don, getting ready to get my certificate, go teach." And he goes, "Gary, let me explain your career choices to you. You can either talk to a stick, or you can try to teach Shakespeare to 10th graders. And I've seen you talk to the stick, and I know you enjoy it." And I'm like, "Well, okay." And I called my mother, and I have a great mother. Don't get me wrong. My mother's great. She goes, "Son, whatever, follow your dreams, go do it." And so I decided to do it with the idea that I would do it for 6 months and then get on with my life. And about 2 months into it, I had the epiphany. Why wouldn't you want to do something fun for a living? And so I decided to do it. And I think the best thing that ever happened to me, what the good Lord blessed me with, is at no point did I ever think the entertainment industry owed me anything. I just figured I would reach the level of my own incompetence. And when I did, they would kick me out the door, and then I'd go find out what I'm supposed to do. And here we are 40 some odd years later, and they haven't kicked me out the door yet.
So what was that 10 to 2 slot? What was the genre?
Oh, it's rock and roll radio, KBIU, Bayou 104. That was it. I was flame throwing, hot rocking, truck driving, leather slapping, hot dog eating. I am doing everything you need in Southeast Louisiana, Lake Charles, Louisiana, as we lovingly called it, Swamp Chuck.
Wow. So you were a rock and roll jock back then. Okay.
But I had started in country. The WKWL, the first station I ever worked at, was a country music station. So it's what my parents listened to. It's what everybody listened to. So I know the Merle Haggards. I know Jack Green, all these names that people have forgotten. They're still up here.
So walk us through then, what's some of the trajectory? So you start off in the 10 to 2, you realize, hey, I might be able to do this for a bit. I'm kind of enjoying it. And it takes a different mindset, because some people think that it sounds glorious because your voice is being heard by sometimes millions, but you're kind of locked into this closet basically, right, with a producer, and like there's not a lot of team camaraderie probably happening over a period of time. Like I was always curious about that, like the life of the DJ. Like what's that like?
It's sausage. If you love sausage, don't watch it being made, right? And I never worked up until I got to San Jose. Did I ever have a producer? It was always just me in a room.
Okay.
Right. But I always enjoyed the concept that I could throw it out there. I could imagine if I were listening. And there are a lot of people who go, I try to speak to this mythical listener, and they get this, it's this person, it's Jenny driving an SUV, or it's, Clarence driving a Cadillac, or whatever. I never thought that way. I always thought, would I find this interesting? Would this be interesting to me? Because if it's interesting and funny to me, then there's got to be somebody out there who will find it funny too.
Right.
And are interesting, or anything like that. And I also learned that early on. You are not going to win people over who don't like what you do.
Yep.
So what you do is you super serve the people who like you, and they will win others over for you. Right?
Yeah.
Because they'll go, hey, have you heard that guy? Have you heard that guy over at pick a station I worked at? Magic FM? Have you heard him? You should listen to him. Right? Because I can't go out there and make them tune in. But if their buddy or their friend or their girlfriend or their wife said, hey, let's listen to this guy, and then I get part of the rotation, that I'm one of the guys they listen to, there you go. But it all boiled down to, what would I find interesting? It's the David Letterman thing, right? I think David Letterman became big because David Letterman did things that he thought was funny.
Right.
Let's take stuff and throw it off a 3-story building. That was one of his bits. There's no focus group in the world.
22, right?
Yeah, there's no focus group in the world that's going to tell you take a TV and throw it off a 3-story building.
Right. So what's it look like then? Like how much of this was a music driven DJ was there talk radio out there? Because there's so many different genres, the way that you can traverse that path on the music business, if you will, on the radio side of things. Where did that kind of path lead you, and what were some of the lessons learned, and what you wish you would have done this and got to do this and you wanted to do this versus that, and what did that look like as you kind of made your way through your career?
I always knew I was not the talk radio guy. And the truth of it is most talk radio people when I was growing up were 50, 60, 70-year-old men or women, usually men, right? So I didn't even think that was a concept that I could aspire to. I liked music. I'm not locked into a genre, even though I truly do love country music. I was after the job. And I knew I could take any music and fit my show into the job, into the music. Right? Whatever it was, whether it was playing Journey, whether it was playing Michael Jackson, whether it was playing Garth Brooks, I knew because what I was going to do was try to communicate. I was going to try to share a story with you. I was going to try to share an experience or a moment or something that's funny to me. And I knew the music would always help me. I've worked with guys before, or I know people in the industry. It's like, because we went for a while into all talk radio in the mornings, right? Howard Stern started it. Well, you're not playing any music. I never did that. I always played music. I think the least amount of music I was playing was probably 6 songs an hour, but usually 6 to 10, because in my mind, I think the audience needs a break every now and then. I think they need that little, okay. And if I can turn on a song that they like or enjoy, I think that's cool. As far as I've never played the regret game. I've never sat back and said, I wish this would have happened or that would have happened. As you and I have talked, I mean, I have a deep faith, and I strayed away from it in my early 20s, but I always knew that it would work out wherever I'm supposed to be. And I one time, remember WLS? I said that before. WLS was going to go country, and I had an agent for about 6 months. And he calls me and he goes, hey, mornings, WLS, what do you think? Can you imagine? I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And they had offered me a good salary, 3 times more than anything I'd ever made in my entire life. And he goes, I'm going to send you the contracts. You have to FedEx back. This was on a Thursday. I get in on a Friday morning. I am ready. I am floating on air. And there were no cell phones. He calls me. He knows I get to the station about 4:30, going on the air at 5. He goes, because they were going to change formats to country. He goes, station across the street changed formats yesterday. Deal's off. And I was crestfallen, but I didn't have any regrets, because for one day, I was the morning man at WLS in Chicago.
I mean, I bet you were Paulie Poopy Pants at 5 a.m. that morning. I wouldn't want to heard your show that day.
That's when you dig in, because that's the thing when you have to dig in. People go, do you ever feel bad? Do you ever go in, blah, 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 or, yeah. And you have to compartmentalize. You have to figure out a way to, hey, if something does happen, especially as I've gotten older in my career, I try to be just as honest as I can be. And a few years ago, my beloved brother-in-law passed away. And I was going, I was lucky that as much of a disappointment as my father was, my sisters married the greatest men. And they stepped in and helped raise me. And my brother-in-law passed, and I was leaving that morning. I was going to the airport, but I came in and I said the story of who he was. And for 10 minutes, all I did was cry. It's all I did. It's all I could do. But I was honest with everyone, and I wasn't trying to lead them their things. They knew that I was honoring this man I loved.
Right.
And I had no fear of doing it. And I think that's one of the things I've learned by not having any regrets. You get to let go of the fear, because whatever's going to be is going to be. And it's, and I got so many notes from that. I got people who sat back and said, I felt that. I've been there. I know that. It helped me a situation where, the guy goes, I went home and told my wife just how devastated I was by my own father's passing a year earlier.
Yep.
Because I didn't want her to see me as weak. And you're like, dude, that's everything I could ever hope for as a man.
Yeah.
What you just told me.
And you have an audience to be able to do that, right? When you can demonstrate that authenticity, even with a little vulnerability when required, you're activating that. We know the neuroscience behind it, right? You're activating that. Really, in your case, it's fascinating because in the radio business, you have a unique ability to create through emotional contagion little pockets of emotional climate in a million different cars and kitchens and anywhere anyone's listening. Your approach to how you're handling that show literally creates the kind of emotional contagion that sets a tone in that very pocket. And so you have that access. And so, that can feel like tremendously liberating, yet at the same time, like an ultimate responsibility, because you know that you have that kind of power as a communicator, right? Because you don't get to see all those people every day. You get to hear sometimes from them when you move them, but to know that you have that kind of influence over others, even at a subconscious level, is both a responsibility, but also it's an excitement, right? It's part of your purpose.
That's why I love your podcast. Emotional contagion. Gosh, I wish I'd have thought of that word. That's great. Yeah. And I take it as the responsibility that it is. I'll share with you a story because I've got them. I was at a radio conference years ago. And there were these guys in there, and it was in a whole bunch of young guys, and they were talking about, I'm just doing radio because I want to get into TV. And they were just really kind of bad-mouthing the whole industry. And I said, I just want to share a story with you. I was on the air one day, and this guy calls, and it sounds weird. It just sounds the weirdest thing in the world. And I'm like, man, where are you calling from? And he goes, I can't tell you. All right, this was during the Iraq War. He goes, I can't tell you. I said, okay, because my family's a military family. I'm like, I'm good with that. What's going on? And he goes, well, we all have headsets on, and every day we all get to pick the radio station we listen to online, and it was my turn to hear home. Mm. And so I told the guys, I said, you're home. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, do me a favor and get out of my business. Right. Because if you can't accept that responsibility, that you're home, and we hear that all the time when people move away and they come back and they're like, oh, it was so cool. I turned you, I got to hear you guys again. I got to hear you again. And I've always sat back and said, that's one of the coolest, greatest things ever.
Wow.
And you never know who's listening. I was at an appearance one day, and there was this kid in the back. This is back in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, and goth dressed, black trench coat, black dyed hair, the rings, the whole thing. And I'm like thinking, wow, he's probably just looking at, thinking we're just a freak show, right? And everybody leaves, and I'm getting ready to go. And all of a sudden, he walks up to me and he goes, I listen to you every morning. I just wanted to meet you. Mm. And I'm like, I got you, God.
Yeah.
Every now and then, good Lord he doesn't lightly tap me. He will take a billy club and hit me right between the eyes.
Well, guys like you and I need the Tommy Boy 2x4 alongside the guy to get our attention, right?
And it made me realize, A, don't judge. B, you have no idea who's out there. Yeah. And C, you don't know what it means at that time. Right?
Isn't that interesting? It's so powerful to pause, and even our listeners right now, thinking about how powerful our words are, the weight that they carry. And now we're talking about it in literally an amplified fashion where, thousands upon thousands are hearing it at one time. But even at an individual level, the words that come out of our mouth, they're as sharp as a double-edged sword. and they carry so much weight, and you don't know who's listening. And those who are listening to the show right now know this because they can hear their kids pattern and parrot phrases that they wish they wouldn't have heard them say. So you never know who's listening. And yet when you think about it consciously, because you're making me think about how many times have I actually done an interview where I turned the camera on here and then consciously, I do think about the audience a lot because I want to make sure I ask questions that I think they would care about. But have I really thought about sometimes the weight of my words, or do I just kind of like have diarrhea of the mouth and who knows what it lands on, right? It's such a powerful responsibility all of us have, but particularly those of us who have a platform of some sort.
I did this before I came on with you. I do it before every show. I do it before every podcast. I go into prayer and I ask God, hey, I'm here. Use me however you want, however you want me to do. And I try to do it. I find people fascinating. I always have. And everybody's got tremendous stories, right? I play a lot of golf. Not well, but I play golf. And I can tell you, I can share a couple of stories with you. I was playing with this old guy one time, and he was wearing overalls and a flannel shirt. And we were playing this municipal golf course. And we're playing and stuff like that. And I said, so are you retired? He goes, yeah. I said, so where'd you retire from? He goes, NASA. I said, and I'm a big space junkie, right? I grew up in that time. And I said, what did you do? And he goes, I was on Werner von Braun's team.
Ooh.
And I'm like, what? And to hear for the next 3 hours the stories he told, that he told me we couldn't look the astronauts in the eye because we were convinced we were going to kill them. And I said, why would you do that? He goes, buddy, all of our rockets blew up. They all failed. Matter of fact, we only had a couple of successful tests before we launched them. We couldn't look them in the eye.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy moly, right? And it's hoop. But if I hadn't taken the time to actually want to hear his stories, it's such a breakthrough. And so for me, I do that. I don't care where I'm at. I listen to your stories. And if you guys have never seen Jeff speak, do it. It's just the most amazing thing you've ever seen. I watching the list of people after you spoke at the event we were at who were just wanting to have 2 minutes to talk to you. That's why I kind of backed up and let him, because I knew, I was like, boy, that guy, something. And your ability to connect and talk with them and get their story out of them, and not even realizing that that's what you're doing, because it helps you connect. It helps that emotional contagion.
Yeah.
That you're able to share with me about you. Because in my business, they know me, they know my name, they know my wife's name, they know my kid's name. And if I can turn it around and go, hey, I truly want to know you, as we tell people all the time, please come up and say hi. We are more excited to meet you than you are us. Because for us, we're just, me and my partner, Julie, we're just sitting in a room talking to each other. And when we meet you, it makes it real.
Right.
So we're so much more excited to meet you.
Well, I think that's you're underscoring the point we set the show off with, I think, is that idea about how curious are you of other people? Because if you're not, you're probably going to live a fairly miserable and lonely existence. But when you are curious about other people, again, not for your own personal benefit, but to truly know their story. That's how you and I met, right? I hadn't even spoken yet. They had a lunch, and I just sat down because you didn't have anybody sitting with you yet. And I just said,
I know.
And I'm like, hey, what's your story, man? Tell me your story. And you say, and all of a sudden you start telling me yours, and we shared stories, and to learn we had so much in common. It just, it takes a little bit of effort to actually be a human who's interested in other humans, but all of us are capable.
It is wonderful, and it changes your life. I played golf. There was a guy who used to play I used to belong to a club, and it was a guy who would play with us every now and then. And it was this older man. He was from India, and he was always nice, but he never talked. He just never talked. And we were in a foursome, and the other two guys we're playing with had to leave. So it was just me and him. And his name was Sanjay. And I said, hey, Sanjay. And he looks at me, and I said, what was the best thing your mother cooked? And you could see his eyes glaze. and him go back in time. Because nobody had ever asked him that.
Right.
And he starts saying, he's telling me this story. I grew up on a farm and they were these pure, see the vegetables. And my mother, if she asked me to pick these vegetables, I knew she was going to make my favorite dish. And from that moment on, we talked the rest of the round. Every time he sees me, I just literally played as a guest there about a month ago. He sees me and he hugs me. Now, if you don't know anything about the Indian culture, they don't hug.
Yeah.
It's just not what they do. He comes every time he sees me now, he hugs me because we have that emotional contagion. And it all went because we had the time to go, listen, sorry, I thought I'd turn this off. That we had the time to take the time to get to know each other because he started asking me questions.
Well, the other thing you did there, though, I don't want the audience to miss this, is you didn't just ask him a generic, general question. You asked him a very specific, but yet a unique enough question that you knew was going to be provocative for him to have to, he could have answered with, he could have just randomly said this, whatever, made up. But the way you, and what I want to encourage the audience to do, we talk a lot about asking great questions. It takes a little, again, it's a skill. Anybody can ask a general, so, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? What? But to ask a question about, hey, I'm just curious, what was the best meal your mother ever cooked for? Like, that's a very unique and provocative question. So the question I have for the audience listening is, do you have a dozen of those? Mm-hmm. And that when you find it and you feel it, you're like, I'm going to ask this person that question, and they've never heard it before. That's a really good skill to have, and kudos to you for underscoring it. So, all right. So who on your list of, you've talked to the cross section of humanity over the course of your career, who jumps out at you that when you started either interviewing them or connecting with them, totally surprised you?
I've had people surprise me as far as not expecting to get the reaction that I got. Jason Aldean. Jason Aldean is not somebody who talks a lot, right?
Yep.
He and I have had long, drawn-out conversations where, if you ask him the right question, there's a lot of singers out there, a lot of artists, they don't suffer fools, right? They just don't. And they get asked the stupidest inane things all the time. And I have no interest in that, right? Like Jason Aldean, I remember talking to him and I'm like, dude, you have a knack for picking openers that go on to become superstars. What do you see? What is it? Because that's a hard skill set. And do you have to talk anybody into it, or do people have to talk you out of it? Which one? And man, he's just off to the races. Right. And he showed me this I've got a board, I chart, and it's a lot more complicated than you think. People will just shock you. Garth doesn't shock you. Garth is one of the smartest people I've ever talked to. And I've talked to some really smart people. One of the smartest people I've ever talked to. He just understands the concept of communication. He understands the concept of service. He understands the concept of, you have made me a very rich man. So I'm going to give you everything I have anytime I do it. We had him, one of our last things, we had a dive bar tour. We had him in this little dive bar, right? Little dive bar. This was 2 years ago. And, Garth Brooks at a dive bar. 500 tickets, that's it. No, and you could only win them. And here's this guy, crowd's going crazy. Nobody can believe it's happening. And we're backstage because he pulls up his bus to literally the back door. And he opens the door and he comes in and he looks at me and the general manager at the time, who's now my partner. And he goes, are you guys happy with this? Did this work the way you want it to? At no point did he come in going, I'm here. Right. No. He was all about, did this work the way you wanted it to? Because I want to make sure this works the way you want it to.
Well, I think what you're getting at with Garth and many folks like that is the idea that he said, that you've made me a wealthy man. So most of those people treated people that way when they were nobody, because it's just kind of who they are, right? In many cases, and it just kind of kept spiraling out of control as their values and beliefs just kind of kept coming out of them. Now, some people change and they lose that, and then usually, the universe rubber bands them right back into reality at some point. But the other thing you said with Jason Aldean, again, I'll keep underscoring it. He's probably, I still today, never been asked that question. You had a conversation with him in a very intriguing and provocative way, and it made him pause and go, wow, that's a great question. I have an entire process for it, but no one's ever asked me to articulate it. And I think that's what I love about you. And I love, I learned from you is many of us can just intuitively ask questions, even if we are curious, but they're not the great questions. They're just generic. And yeah, eventually you might, hem haul your way to something interesting. But if you can open and lead with that really interesting, provocative question, the way that you're so skilled at, you just create that connection so much faster, and you learn so much more, right, from that person as you go. So, tell us a little bit about, as we pivot here toward the end. So you pivoted from radio, and now you made the adjustment, and radio's it is what it is. Satellite came on, all this stuff's changed, and the whole world's changing. And you went down the streaming path, and now your show is streaming, and you're hosting it all the time. It's what you're doing now for a living. Tell us a little bit about that, maybe a little bit about that pivot, and then what you're doing today with it, and how people can get connected and listen into your show.
We were in a unique situation. When radio stations go off the air, it is almost always, 100% of the time, because they were making no money, or they had no ratings, or usually a combination of both. Well, what happened with us is our owner died. He was 98 years old, not a tragedy, used up all the thing. And the people on his board were all his friends, which were 90-year-old people. And they didn't want to do it anymore. And so we tried to buy it, but we got outbid by a factor of 6. Right? So, because somebody wanted the signal. They didn't want to keep doing country. They wanted the signal to put their format on, a syndicated format. Well, when we went off the air, we were not only the number one station in San Jose, California. Our morning show was the number one rated morning show per capita in the United States of America. And so that's what I told my partners, Julie and Nate, and I said, hey, we have something here. Because they were like, well, okay, it's been fun, now we're done. And I said, well, we have something here. We have a brand that is crazy strong. So let's try to keep doing it. And the beautiful thing about what we're doing now, because I'm sitting in my palatial studios, is we got rid of the overhead, right? So we didn't have to make the amount of money you have to make to do what you're doing. And Nashville, because we were the largest locally owned radio station. So we made all of our programming decisions. There was nobody sitting in an office somewhere else saying, we'll play this or play that. We just had it based on what we thought was good songs. And Nashville and the artist loved that. They've been so accommodating, and every artist was like, hey, we're there. The day we switched from the 95.3 FM to the stream, because I told everybody, hey, flip over. And the moment we flipped over to the stream, who was waiting for me? The aforementioned Kenny Chesney. And so Kenny Chesney was there to talk and say, hey, this is, and we think that's the future. Radio has its problems. And I say that with a heavy heart because I obviously love radio. But we're doing that now and creating that path and trying to do it a brand new way. And we're finding a way to create an income, which I love radio, but I ain't doing it for free. And then the podcast, literally a friend of mine tried to get me into podcasting. I'm not kidding, 10, 15 years ago. But I had never used one. So I'd never considered it. No. Well, finally I started hearing podcasts and I'm like, oh, well, I think I can do that. And it's a different skill set. Our interviews were 5 minutes long on radio, right, which is just enough time to go, how's your new song? Okay, cool. Let's play it. Well, now all of a sudden you have this time to really go deep with them. And luckily we're finding out people are in for that. I try to limit my podcast to an hour. Why? Because I don't have more than an hour to listen.
Right.
Much less talk. Right. So I love Joe Rogan and he can do 3 or 4 hours. I haven't ever listened to a whole episode of Joe Rogan in my entire life.
All right. It's so true.
So I try to limit it. I try to do it. And if we have more to talk about, I'll bring the guest back on. Come back with me in a couple of weeks or months and let's catch up where we are. And we've been able to create a path for us. The good Lord has been tremendously faithful to us. And so it's a brand new world. It's exciting. It's terrifying to some extent, but not really. As I told my buddy who's a surgeon, dude, if I screw up, nobody dies.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. And I still take the attitude that I've always had. Business doesn't owe me anything.
So for the novice out there, when you talk about this world of streaming versus, is podcast streaming, is it not like, give someone a little 101 on what streaming services are. How often are they on? Is it a constant flow, just like on a radio? Is it like what's your channel do when it's on and off? And like, give someone a little 101 on that, because I think there's somebody interested in listening.
It is a radio station. I do a morning show Monday through Friday from 5:30 till 9, just like I have always done. It is an online radio station, but there's no radio to go with it. Usually that's what happens is you have a signal and you just combine it, put your online stuff. We decided to just create this pad and go from there. That's what we do, just like you tune into a radio station. And we've done it a different way where, usually you'll hear 19 commercials, drives us all crazy, right? Right? That's how you pay for everything. Well, what we've decided to do, because we are so more agile, we just sell hours. So for our sponsors, let me just pick one, DGDG, which is a big car dealership here in San Jose. Well, this hour brought to you by DGDG. And we'll play 2 commercials in the entire hour, but they're both that commercial. And so they get super served. The people who are listening are like, I can listen to a minute of commercials. Right.
Yep.
And that's the way that works. Whereas a podcast, you know as well as I do, I release one episode a week. Jeff, just like you could.
So is it, they're separate things though? You don't have them combined. They're completely separate products, if you will, from a listener step.
Yeah. KRTY.com is what I have with my partners.
Say that again slower.
KRTY.com.
KRTY.com. That's your streaming.
That's my streaming service that me and my fellow people who are at the station, we're partners. But now the GaryScottThomas.com platform, that media platform, that's just me.
That's your podcast.
That's the podcast and everything we do with that.
Wow.
So that's they're separate worlds, even though I think on the website, I think they have access to my podcast because, we're all there and it helps us all do that.
And is your streaming station still music heavy, primarily music?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We probably play more music on the stream than we did in day to day. Right. When we were on the FM, we probably play more music on the stream. But with the caveat, when we do take a break, we may go longer on the breaks because we're getting an entire thought out or we're talking about something. Or this morning, Julie was telling me about how she accidentally slammed her 2-year-old grandson's hand in the car. Not bad, but just enough to scare him. Well, that was a 2 and 3 minute story, right. Because she was going through the whole thing. And she goes, I was more upset than anybody else, more than he was. His parents, like, accidents happen, Mom. But it was wonderful to show her fear. Right. And I'm like, the funny thing of it is if I told you I'd done that to my kids, your first reaction to me would be, calm down. Nothing's broke. Right. But it's something we love. Now everything changes.
Is it easier or harder to track listenership in the streaming world versus the traditional world? Easier. It is.
Right, because you click in, and that way the metrics are just so much easier. Where radio is like a billboard company. You can sit back and go, hey, we're on Highway 101, and this many people pass by Highway 101. Right, so radio, we could say, hey, these are the people listening. But I can't show you what people are going to your business or looking for your stuff. And most people don't go in and go, hey, I heard you on. That's just not the way we operate. Right. Well, with metrics, you can, we just sent out all of our reports to our clients on my podcast today. Today's that day. We do it once a month where we sit back and we go, here it is. This is how many clicked on you. This is how many leads generated. This is what it's your cost per lead. This is why it's still a very good buy for you. And we have found that, because you can give them hard data and you can go, listen, because I always tell everybody, because I'm I'm the salesman. That's another skill I've had to learn how to do. Is I can lead them to your business. After that, it's up to you.
Sure.
But I can lead them to your business. And the good thing is that most people in today's age, they understand that. They totally get it. I mean, you've got 78-year-olds on Twitter. They get it. They're doing TikTok. I mean, it's not like my mother, who, as far as I can remember, had the blinking light on the VCR, right? Because it's not something she understood. Now, you and I, who knew it at our age, we would be as versed in it as we are.
It's amazing, and I love it. And I think this gives folks like us and those who came out of an industry that might be a dying dinosaur. Now you're saying, look, man, I'm not giving in. I'm not giving up. This is my calling, my passion. And you've been able to do that and lean into it. And I just commend you for that. I think it's amazing. And I want the folks that are listening to our show to go out, check out your streaming station, check out your podcast. Give them the streaming station again.
KRTY.com.
KRTY.com, and then GaryScottThomas.com. This will all be on the page too, by the way. People can click right into it. And Gary, I'd love to have you back on periodically. Let's just make it kind of a regular thing where we keep in connection with each other and how we help serve each other. Because I think the world of you. I think you're doing something that's not only worthy of more people listening to you, but worthy of us learning from you as we go along this journey together. So thank you for being a guest today on the Driving Change podcast, because you're out there doing it, brother. You're driving change.
I have so enjoyed being a guest on this podcast, almost as much as I enjoy listening to it.
Well, thank you.
And I'm a big fan.
Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon, a great evening, and we'll have you back soon.